minutes.
So neither Connor nor I are here.
Yes.
So I think
So
I would rather postpone it.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree.
all right. We will table the minutes till next meeting,
Okay.
and we'll continue with ULUDR amendments. Unified Land
Use.
Use Development Regulations,
You got it.
something like that. Why
That-
don't you say zoning regs?
Well, you can say
There
that
you go.
too. That's fine.
First old goats that, so we remember them by.
It's both work. So, okay. So yeah, we're continuing on with our discussion of the amendments to the land use regulations, primarily for Act 47 updates. What I want to focus on is Articles 2, 3, and 4 tonight, and hopefully we'll be able to get through all this. We've talked a lot already about Article 2, so there's a couple things I want to highlight specifically just to make sure that you all are aware of the changes that are being included. But I think we should be able to get through this. Hopefully we'll be able to get through these fairly quick. So anyway, I'm going to share my screen here so we can all see what's going on. And give me 1 second to pop in a few other windows in case people show up. I can let them in.
Thank God I printed this off because I can't read that on the screen.
Well, I'll make it a little.
But I don't need to. Because I've got a paper copy in front of me.
I also want the folks in the room to be able to see it. So
Okay.
we spent a lot of time talking about the land use table. I don't have anything to highlight there for specific changes, but I do want to highlight note 4. This is a amended note that talked previously about density, multi-unit density in the central business district only. What I'm proposing here is some amendments to the language for central business district density, but also because we're putting multi-unit into the general commercial, the C1, adding in language about that, and also adding language about the downtown core, because those will also be new. Let me just back up here quick to show that. So under the multi-unit of the 5 units or more, we're adding this as a permitted use in the C1, C2, and in the downtown core. So I wanted to update the note number 4 to reflect those additional zoning districts. But the other part that I want to make sure I highlight here is that what I'm proposing is that properties that front on East Allen Street or Main Street will have no density limitations. So they can be as dense as they need to be based on those properties. There's a couple reasons for this. One, and I'm going to bring up the zoning map here as well. So we're talking about the properties in orange. Basically, the Winooski block out to the Bevy is on this white property. So this is East Street over here on the end. So basically, the properties that front along East Allen Street, directly across from the downtown core district, also included in the TIF district. So these properties along East Allen, and then the properties along Main Street here, from basically the post office at the corner of West Allen and Main down to the residential building just past the Mandarin. Those properties I'm proposing would have no density limitation. One,
Hey, Eric,
yeah, go ahead.
sorry to interrupt you. Would that include, is that next lot down on the bottom of Main Street, is that the mill?
It is the mill, but because that is fronts on West Canal Street and is addressed on West Canal Street, I would not consider that a Main Street property.
So, but the way it's written is it fronts on Main Street.
Yeah.
So I don't view that as fronting on Main Street. That the property extends to Main Street, but the frontage of that is West Canal Street.
Yeah, that's helpful.
Well, I think you might have a tough argument there. I know that when we looked at other things, if it had any frontage at all on the street, it counted. So, just a heads up.
Yeah, we could add language that said that fronts on and is addressed as,
Right.
so that the address has to also coincide to Main Street or East Allen Street.
That's good.
But would it, I mean, I guess would it necessarily, let's just say, we said, at the mill, no density limit. Is there, I guess what is the concern about that versus the other properties here?
Actually, let me look at something quick, because this argument, or this discussion may be unnecessary. Just looking at the size of the mill property. So right now, the mill property it's just over 6 acres in size, according to this information, 6.2 acres. There are about 170 units, dwelling units on that property. If we left it at the 60 units per acre, they would be allowed to do 372 units. So they're already well under what they could do at that density. So my guess is that they're maxed out to what they can do for what they need for parking and what they can do for developable area. So they may already be at the max that they could do.
And I know I should probably know this, but like in the central business district, are there lot coverage limitations?
There are not. So the central business district allows for 100% lot coverage, provided the property is able to get a stormwater permit to accommodate that coverage.
I assume there's a height limitation.
There is a height limitation of 60 feet.
Yeah. So that's kind of your.
So that's going to be
limiting
right.
factor.
Right.
Yeah.
The height is going to be the limiting factor.
Yeah.
For the most part.
Yeah.
So
Is that from the street or is that any part of the building?
any part of the building, the maximum height the building can be is 60 feet.
So they're probably pretty close to that, if not there already.
They're
If you go to the lower parking lot,
60 feet's pretty high.
they're probably
it's very
around
high. I don't think they're there
40 maybe,
yet. Yeah.
but
it's probably 60 feet is about 5 stories.
roughly
Yeah.
5 or 6 stories. Those are, they've obviously got a taller floor to floor span.
Right.
Right.
So, they're probably, in some parts of the building, they might be close to the 60 foot.
Okay.
So,
But is that from the grade or is that
from grade.
Okay.
Yep. And we have a definition of how we measure height. So, but that property aside, there's a lot of these smaller properties along both Main Street and East Allen Street. And I think I did bring this up several meetings ago. For example, the Winooski block is based on that standard of 60 units per acre. It's a non-conforming building because based on their size, they would only be allowed to have 19 units and they've got 24 units. Similarly, the Monkey House is a non-conforming because the most they could have is 2 units and they've got 3. So eliminating the density maximum for those properties, one, makes some of them conforming, and 2, allows additional density to be placed adjacent to the downtown core where we want other density. And these are all properties, both the East Allen properties and the Main Street properties are included in the TIF district. So there is some correlation there to allow for that, basically removing any type of density limitation for those properties only. So as comparison, this property off of Barlow Street here would still be limited to that density cap because it is not on East Allen Street or on Main Street, but is still in the Central Business District.
So going back to the woolen mill,
Yep.
I'm not sure that, why not just leave it the way it is and see what happens? There's still minimum parking requirements, right? Did we drop it down to, is it 3/4 of a space per unit or for apartments or 1 per unit?
It'd be 1 space per unit.
Okay. So they're probably pretty close to that,
Right.
like you said.
Right. But some of these other properties, like for example, on East Allen Street, there's these 3 properties here that are a parking lot, which, that's not really a great use. And so if they were able to redevelop that without any type of density limitation, it could provide some much needed housing, for example, and provide a better use for those properties. Similarly, the bank property, for example, if that were to redevelop based on the size that's there now, they might only be able to put 4 units on it or so, but could do, they might be able to design something that could accommodate 6 to 10 units, but they wouldn't be able to do that, again, given the height allowance that's there.
Right.
So I think it's a way to help some of these properties, one, bring them into conformance, but also to allow for some redevelopment options of some underutilized properties.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, the parking lot, I used to park over there when I lived at River Run because we only had one spot, so
Yep.
we put our second car there.
Yep.
And it was never full, and as I understand it, the garage is like almost
Yeah.
never full.
Yeah.
Right.
Right? And I think this is where we want housing, if there's going to be housing.
Yeah,
right?
and I think this can also take some of the pressure off of the residential areas where we have to allow for more density based on Act 47. This could provide some opportunities where somebody might say, well, I could either buy that lot in an RB district and redevelop it with 4 units, or I could buy a lot here and
Right.
put 15 units on it, for example. So, I think it opens up some options, and I think it makes sense just given proximity to the downtown core. The fact that these are in the TIF district, I think it's a good, can help promote some additional development density.
Yeah, I agree with these changes. That's fine with me.
Christine, do you have any thoughts?
I'm always a fan of bringing the regulations into conformance with the existing development.
Oh, why am I not surprised to hear that?
So that's one of the changes, and then the other two, basically, the other parts of this limit the C2, the general commercial, to 30 units per acre, and then the downtown core basically just references the downtown regulations in Article 3 for what the density limitations are there. The only other change here is just these notes at the bottom, which were requested, a recommendation from Sarah. She asked that and I think it's a good idea just to make sure that we're stating what
Right.
P and CU and
Right.
P/CU mean in the charts.
And there haven't been any changes to the table about P versus CU, right?
Not since the last time we reviewed it, no.
Okay, right.
I mean, there are some uses that are, let me just back up to that.
I mean, that's what I thought of.
There are some uses that we're updating to be permitted or conditional,
Yeah.
depending on the scenarios, but otherwise, no, I think everything is still pretty much the same as the last time this was reviewed.
All right.
Just one thing about those definitions. Can you go to the P/CU
Yep.
definition? So indicates that special circumstance exists that, if met, would allow the use to be administratively approved. Special circumstances, that that definition doesn't really explain what that means. So
Right.
I assume that for the specific uses we're talking about, it's like spelled out.
Yeah,
more
so
somewhere.
let me just confirm, but yes, I believe anywhere where we list something as both permitted or conditional, there's a footnote with the use.
Okay.
So yeah, for accessory dwelling, there's a footnote that references section 5.1 that has those specific circumstances. For the multi-unit, the 3 to 4 dwellings, the note would reference the priority housing section that we'll get to hopefully at the next meeting. So yes, so that'll outline what those specific circumstances are that need to be met in order to be administratively approved.
Okay.
And then under the group boarding homes, that footnote 5 actually includes those circumstances, which is basically a distance requirement. So that it'd be permitted if it's more than 1,000 feet from another group home, otherwise it's conditional. So those circumstances are spelled out. I guess that's a long way of saying all that.
Is that satisfactory to you?
Yeah, I think it's fine.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions on those items? So the next thing we have, I want to just touch briefly on the dimensional requirements for the primary structures. We've talked a lot about this over the past several meetings, so none of this has changed from our last discussion. The one thing I did want to highlight is under the public zoning district, we don't list anything currently, and I wasn't proposing to list anything, but then as I was reading through this, I added a note for what NA means, and that it basically says that the use is not allowed. So I want to put something in here because we want to be able to, so for example, the public district, the uses are pretty limited in that public zoning district as it is. And there's only, I think, 4 properties that are zoned public. The uses, it does not allow for any residential uses. It does not allow for any commercial uses. It only allows for a cultural facility, a daycare facility, an educational facility, a non-commercial recreation and entertainment facility, and accessory or supporting uses. And let me just pull up the zoning map again. So, as I mentioned, there's only 4 properties that meet or that are zoned this way. Gilbrook, the front end of Gilbrook, a baseball field up by the school, and for some reason the Winooski Housing Authority property at the top of Franklin Street is zoned public. And then Landry Park and the Myers Pool. Those are the only properties that are zoned public. The smallest one, I believe, is Myers Pool, and it's at just under 2.5 acres. So when we look at the use table, we have no standards for these, excuse me, for these districts. So for the residential, we can leave that as an NA. For the non-residential, though, I think we need to include something and then have a minimum frontage and depth, which I was thinking we could match potentially any of the residential districts if we wanted to, or we could match any of the other districts, quite frankly, because the properties that are currently in that category would meet or exceed all of the standards for any of the other districts that we have now.
Eric, can we just put for the minimum lot size, just put none?
We could, yeah, that was something else I was thinking we could do, is just list it at 0 and just,
Yeah.
it has no minimum.
Yeah, the idea of a lot size minimum for a public use, I guess I'm not sure what that really accomplishes, and I don't know, maybe there's some small lot that at some point the city decides to build, like, I don't know, a small daycare or something,
Well,
you know?
Yeah, and I was thinking about making all of these zeros instead of NA. Obviously, the residential use would stay as NA because we don't allow residential uses, but the rest of them, setting them all at 0 or no minimum. That way, if there's some sliver of land somewhere, it could become a park, and there's no minimum requirements for it. It can just be used as is and be conforming for that zoning district.
Because I think for a property to be rezoned public, I mean, like, we would have to approve that, right?
Yep,
So
that's right.
I mean, I think whatever the individual proposed use was, someone would like look at it
Yeah,
and see if
right.
it seems appropriate.
Right, and
So-
we do have setbacks, we do have a maximum height, we do have a maximum lot coverage listed, so, I mean, I think putting it at 0 or no minimum, to me, makes sense. Again,
I agree.
the uses are so limited in this district that I don't think anybody's gonna come in to request a change to public because it's gonna hamstring anything that they can do.
I like no minimum as opposed to 0.
Okay, yep,
And maybe for minimum lot frontage and depth, same thing, no minimum.
yep, I can do that.
And the map brings up a question, I guess, at some point, should we look at, the housing up on, top of Franklin Street?
Yeah, I mean, I think that does make sense. There's obviously some other properties that we've been talking about evaluating. For example, Memorial Park, the back half of Gilbrook, Cassavant. These are all properties we've identified in the future land use map in the master plan as needing some evaluation. So, but yeah, I think it's worth looking at in the future, that property at the top of Franklin Street.
Yeah, so the housing authority piece on the bottom of Elm Street, is that in the RC?
That is in the RC.
RB.
Yep, that's in the RC district.
RC.
Yep.
Oh, but we've got RB and RA up there, so,
Right.
yeah.
Right. So, okay, yeah, I can list those at no minimum. I think that makes sense.
Okay.
Great. And then we have not spent really any time, I don't think, looking at the accessory structure table. So everything here is basically the same as it was previously with relation to setbacks for the front, side, and rear. None of that's changed from what was previously included, and let me just double check that, with the exception that we didn't list anything in the central business district or general commercial or the downtown core and the gateway. So I'm just referencing Article 3 and Appendix B for those two, and then just matching the rest for the central business district and general commercial. The biggest change here is related to maximum height. Previously, or the current regulations have the maximum height for an accessory structure at the same as the primary structure for almost all of these. So 35 feet for the primary structure in the residential districts, 35 feet for an accessory structure similarly. So what I've done here is amended it to say basically 75% of the primary structure, but no less than 10 feet. So that way, if you just have a single story building, you can do at least 10 feet for an accessory structure. If you're building a garage or whatever, we measure height as a reference to from grade to, I believe it's average of the peak. So it's not to the exact peak of the roof. So there's the structure itself from ground to peak of roof may end up being taller, but by the definition of how we measure, it would be 10 feet.
Is that 75%? Sorry, is that best practice or?
You know, it varies. What I wanted to do is make sure that we weren't. An accessory structure is intended to be subordinate to the primary structure. So I wanted to make sure that there was some deviation or differentiation between what was primary and what was accessory. You'll notice that I have a note here on the maximum height. So the only one, I guess, let me back up a step. The only one that I'm not proposing to be 75% or 10 feet is the central business district at 25 feet, because we allow for buildings to be 60 feet in that district. So
Yeah.
I wanted to give a little bit of extra increase there. And presumably, there's probably not going to be a lot of accessory structures in the central business district, just given the nature of the uses
Yeah.
and what's allowed there. So that seemed like that was a good compromise. The note that I have on maximum height basically says that if you're putting an accessory dwelling into that accessory structure, you can go at least 17 feet in height to accommodate potentially a garage with a first floor parking area and then a dwelling above it.
Yeah.
And then also that if you were allowed to be higher based on the size of the primary structure, you could obviously go taller than 17 feet. But 17 feet would give you, that would basically give you, and I looked at multiple plans for accessory dwellings that we've received over the years, and they're all right around that 17-foot height. So that's basically a first floor of 8 feet with a gap of a foot between any type of garage space and living space. So I wanted to make sure that we were not limiting accessory dwellings as part of these accessory structures. So
Question for you on that, Eric, if you've got 8 feet plus a foot, that's 9 feet.
Yep.
That gives you 8 feet for a living area.
Yep.
Should we allow that to be a little bit higher? Because,
Yeah.
I mean, some people like a 9-foot or a 10-foot ceiling.
Again, based on the way we measure height, we only measure to average roof pitch. So the overall height of the building may be taller than 17 feet, but we're only measuring to the average roof pitch for that. So it's possible they could have a 9-foot second story based on the design.
I don't understand the average roof pitch. So are you saying if I've got a gable roof,
Yep.
you're going halfway point of that?
Yep. Right.
Is the height?
Yep.
So you're losing, so that means you're losing some height on the second floor.
Well, no, so you're actually gaining peak height, the overall total height. So we're taking from eave line to peak and taking the middle of that is where we measure height to.
So,
What do you mean E-line?
right, like above, if I'm understanding this correctly, like you could actually at the very top of the structure, at least theoretically, have like a loft that's above this average pitch, if you will.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Let me just bring up our regulations. That might be the easier way to do this. So here's our diagram for height.
Yep.
So we basically measure from the mean ground level, so whatever the average is of high and low, and go to the mean roof line. So
Okay.
you can, so basically this space up here above that eve line is still, that's still considered, that's still included in that height, but anything above that, then we wouldn't count that towards the height limitation.
Right, so what I'm saying is, keep that up. If you've got, the first 8 feet is garage,
Yep,
and then you've got a foot for whatever between the floors.
yep, or less.
That leaves you 9 feet to get up to that medium pitch. So that means that some of the second floor space, that 9 feet, is cut down because of the angle of the roof, unless you put a dormer on it. You know what I'm saying? You're losing floor space in that case.
Well, presumably,
You are, I mean, it's that simple. If I go only 19 feet or 17 feet, I've got what, 8 feet of,
I see your point now, Mike. Yes.
yeah.
Right. Well, let me.
That's why I'm saying maybe we could go 20 feet or something like that to give them a full second story. Or maybe we just say accessory structure can be a maximum of 2 stories unless the primary structure allows you more or something like that.
Well, I'd want to put a number on it, actual foot number, because you could say I've got 2 stories that are both 20 feet tall.
Yeah.
So, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but I mean, I'd be comfortable going to 20 feet.
I think that gives a little bit more flexibility to someone. They could have a full second story in that situation.
I'd be okay with that.
Everyone else okay with that?
Yeah, I'm fine with that too. I guess I'm still hung up on the 75% thing, and I'm sorry for bringing us all the way back there. I'm just curious.
No problem.
I get the intention in terms of having an accessory structure be subordinate to the main structure, but doesn't, I don't know, like the minimum setbacks and like lot like placement, does that not inherently limit like the scale?
I would say no. Mostly because, so as an example, there's a property over on Union Street, 62 Union Street. They just put an accessory dwelling on the back of the property. A detached cottage is how it was classified. So it went through conditional use. It's a 3-bedroom, I believe it's a 3-bedroom, 2-car attached garage. That's the way we define detached cottage allows for 100 square feet of finished habitable, 1,000 square feet of finished habitable floor area.
Okay.
So that structure is, I believe, right at 35 feet tall and right at 1,000. It's actually of habitable floor area it's like right at 1,000, but the garage doesn't count as habitable floor area. So it's in essence a second house on the property, which isn't a bad thing. I'm not suggesting that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
But as an accessory structure, it kind of, in my opinion, doesn't really meet the definition of accessory structure, being something that is subordinate to the primary structure.
Well, and somewhere we have something that says each lot is intended to only have one primary structure.
Right.
Right?
Right. That's new language we're adding in here to Article 2, unless it comes in as a planned unit development. And then they can do as many as the project would allow.
And do we, like, other than this proposed 75% height limit, do we have anything else concrete to kind of like give some teeth to that goal, right? Of having only one primary structure.
Yeah, not really.
Right.
Not really.
Yeah. So to me, this seems to be intended to, like, it's like a way of carrying that
Right.
out.
Right. Yeah, and just doing some quick calculations, if you have a primary structure that's 20 feet tall, so roughly, 2 stories with some roof pitch, the 2-story structure would give you a 15-foot tall accessory structure at 75%. So it's still, that's still a fairly good sized building, but is, again, obviously incidental. Well, I shouldn't say obvious if it's only 5 feet shorter than the primary structure. So but it is still then accessory. And I think that's really the intent here. The other option is we could put in a specific number if we wanted to do it that way.
Well, what if we did like 80%? So it's a little bit higher.
I mean, we could do that. Yeah, that's fine
Are you
too.
looking for a compromise with me here?
Well,
I missed
don't
that.
really. I mean, I'm more aligned with you. I'm thinking about where the commission tends to be as a whole.
I guess that's that is also like the border that I'm walking to, because I think we all know here I'm fine with 2 primary structures and being 100%.
Sure.
However, if the intention of this measure is to make sure that it's an accessory dwelling, like what is it, or accessory structure, what are the parameters around that?
Right.
And, I mean, I don't know.
Eric,
Yeah.
what it makes, going back to your original and the discussion we just had, it seems like, and I'm just right off the top of my head, so this may sound crazy, but it seems like the language you had was fine, but if we can add something like, if the accessory structure includes first floor garage, then the height is 20 feet or something like that, because that's really what we're talking about, is if someone has a garage underneath living space, right?
I mean, are you referring to the note number 4?
Yeah, note number 4, because what you're just saying, the 17 feet, if it's an accessory structure without a garage, that's fine, because, whatever.
Right.
But the thing is, you brought up, if someone has a garage on the first floor and living space above, that's where I think the height needs to be adjusted. So if we just maybe add some of that language.
Oh, I see. So what you're suggesting is that there's basically 2 categories of accessory structure. One is an accessory structure that's purely a dwelling.
Right.
And the other is a garage that has a finished floor above it.
Right.
And have those as 2 different height.
Different height to allow the garage, the second floor of the garage, to have adequate
I see.
space. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me, and I'm fine with that. I'm just curious, does that open up like other doors to hypotheticals around, I don't know, building on top of an existing structure that isn't a garage? And I don't know what that would be in this moment, but
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm saying here. Yeah.
I mean, maybe, yeah, and I can look at some language, but I'm thinking about something along the lines of a new accessory structure that is intended as an accessory dwelling
Yes.
could be X versus conversion
okay.
of an existing accessory structure to include
Slash garage.
an accessory dwelling can be X.
Yeah, I think that gets us to where we were talking about.
I don't have a concern with it. I think, to me, it could encourage, well, let's put a garage in the accessory structure, right?
Right.
Like, let's
Oh,
make
that's a
it,
good- that's
let's
a good
make
point.
it more like a regular house, because if we put a garage in, then we can build higher. And I mean, that doesn't really bother me, but I think that's what I would, to me, that's the incentive that I think that creates. So
Yeah, it could. Or like I said, the other option is we could just put in a set height that is for accessory structures and just leave it at that.
right.
You can do with it as you please.
I prefer a percentage versus like
Yeah,
set height.
I like a
All right,
percentage
that's fine.
kind of,
Yeah.
because I don't know. I think that fulfills the goal of like not radically changing the character of like what
Sure.
currently exists, right? So I kind of like the percentage thing, and you have the alternative minimum, if you will, if you have like
Right.
a weird, really
Right.
small, really short
Yep.
existing primary structure.
Yeah,
right? So
and to that point right now, we can have an accessory structure that is 20 feet taller than the primary structure based on our current regulations
Yeah.
because we allow the same height. And if a primary structure is built that's only a single story ranch house, for example, you could come in with a 35-foot tall accessory structure behind it.
yeah.
So, I guess, so how do you all feel about language that differentiates a new accessory structure for a dwelling versus conversion of an existing accessory structure to include a dwelling? What I really want to avoid is any limitations on accessory dwellings.
Yeah.
We have to allow them by right, for one, and I want to make sure that we're able to accommodate those. I have seen multiple projects over the years where somebody has an existing garage and they want to add living space above it. Not expanding the size of the garage at all, just converting it to existing living space. But I've also seen it where a brand new structure has been built that is both garage and living space, or 2 stories of living space. So I want to be sensitive to the various options, but also mindful that these are intended to be, based on the definition, subordinate to the principal structure. So they shouldn't be larger, I guess.
So getting back to, I think Connor was talking about it, maybe if you just take out the new with a garage, so it allows, if someone wants to put in a accessory structure with a first floor garage and living space above.
Yeah, I think the way I would write it is a new accessory structure versus an existing accessory structure, the conversion. So if you're developing a new accessory dwelling, thereby creating a new accessory structure that doesn't exist on the property currently, that's one height allowance. But if you have an existing building, whatever it's used for, doesn't matter what the use is, and you want to add living space to it, there's a different height allowance.
Do we need to put a height allowance on a existing? I suppose if it's a 1-story garage, you do, right?
If they wanted to add above it, yeah.
Yeah.
Why do we care about, well, I guess, so I guess to the extent that the goal, if the goal was to basically allow for more height or some other way of more building for an accessory dwelling, I understand that. I guess I don't, to me, whether you're just building from scratch or you're adding to something that exists, I think it seems to me what we care about is the ultimate like finished product, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. So maybe we just change this to 20 feet and say that an accessory structure that includes an accessory dwelling can be up to 20 feet unless the primary structure would allow it to be taller based on 75%.
I tend to agree with him. It was the intention of the delineation about like if, for example, like an existing structure, like a garage would push, having a 1-story, like over like the limit,
Yep.
that would be preventative to actually making it like, so we kind of grandfather them in. Is that the intention of like the delineation?
Well, I think the intent is to, again, make sure that the accessory structures are accessory.
Right. Right. That's the whole point of
to have a different height so that it's not basically two primary structures, you're just building one. I mean, if you have right now, our regulations, if you have a large enough lot and can stay below the maximum lot coverage, you can build an accessory structure that's twice as large as the primary structure.
In like, well, let me ask, what in like the RA, RB, RC, what's our maximum height for?
35 feet right now.
In all three?
Yep.
Okay.
They're all three the same.
So,
And the maximum height for an accessory structure in all three is also 35 feet.
So if let's say you have a 35-foot primary structure, 20 feet puts you at what, 4/7 of that? So that's a little bit less than 75%.
Well,
right?
so that's the caveat that you can go taller if the primary or principal structure would allow for it based on the 75 feet. So if you if we capped it at 20 feet, for example, and you had a primary structure that was 30 feet tall, that would put you at 22 feet. So that'd allow you to go over that minimum or that cap. The way that 4 is written, that you'd be limited to the height unless the primary structure would allow you to go higher based on the 75%.
Right.
So throwing another wrench into this discussion, if you've got a single-story house,
Yep.
you want to put an accessory in your single-story house, the average height is, let's say, 15 feet.
Yep.
I can build a 17-foot tall structure for an accessory dwelling.
Yes.
Yep.
So does that kind of contradict what we're trying to do?
Well, I think that's why allowing that for the accessory dwelling was the carve out there. So that if it's for a dwelling, you can go taller to accommodate that extra height and living space. But if it's just an accessory structure for a garage, for example, then you'd be limited to that 75% or 10 feet.
Okay, I'm sorry. So we're talking about accessory structure as opposed to accessory dwelling unit.
Well, we're talking about both, but
Yeah.
there's
Okay.
the purpose of note 4 is to catch exactly what you just talked about, Mike.
Okay.
All right. If you're doing an accessory dwelling, there's the allowance for the additional height to potentially get a garage underneath it if you wanted.
Yep.
Whereas if you're just building a garage, then it would be 75%, but not less than 10 feet to allow you to have some usable space.
What if maybe this might make it easier, and correct me if I'm understanding wrong, Eric. If I understand this correctly, for an accessory dwelling under this, any accessory dwelling, no matter how big the primary structure, could be at least 17 feet.
As it's written, yes.
Yeah. And if you have an existing structure that's 35 feet, you can go up to 75% of that.
Correct.
Which is 24 and a half feet.
Right.
So that would put all, at least accessory dwellings, between 17 feet and 24 and a half feet.
Correct.
Under this.
That's correct.
Seems reasonable to me, I guess.
So I'm sorry. I've been confusing.
I'm with you on this one.
I've been confusing accessory structure and accessory dwelling unit. We're talking only here about accessory structure that can be up to 75% of the primary structure, but not less than 10 feet.
For just an accessory structure, correct.
Right. So why do we have 4 in there? Because it brings in accessory dwelling unit, other than saying if it's got first floor garage or non-habitable space,
Sure.
you're putting on a second floor, it can be such and such.
So the reason I brought in item 4 is because a lot of the accessory dwellings that I've been seeing are 2-story, or they're Because there is a limitation on the size that they can be, a lot of times they're being designed as a two-story building.
With a garage first floor.
Or with living space on the ground floor and with like kitchen, living room on the ground floor and a bedroom on the second floor.
Okay.
Because they're limited, some of that's based on where they're going, where there's just limited lot area and the setbacks won't accommodate a single story building as an accessory dwelling.
And that's fine. I think, don't you, on 4, you want to talk about, you're talking about an accessory structure that has living space above whatever the current use is.
Or just the dwelling itself.
See, that's what's confusing me, I guess, and maybe it's just my thick head. We're talking about accessory structure, and we brought in accessory.
So I'll say it this way. All accessory dwellings are accessory structures, but not all accessory structures are accessory dwellings.
Understood.
So I want to make sure, I want to have the carve out that if there's an accessory structure that is an accessory dwelling, that can get that additional height to allow for that living space.
Okay, so it says that includes accessory dwelling unit. So we're talking about an accessory structure that has both non-living space and dwelling unit?
It could.
Or should it say an accessory structure that has, or that's intended to be accessory dwelling unit? And I'm sorry, I'm throwing a wrench into the middle of this, and I probably shouldn't.
This is good because I want to make sure that it's clear and what we're talking about. So would it clear things up if I just deleted the first part and just said an accessory dwelling can be up to 17 feet in height?
Well, but okay. What about the example? You have an existing 12-foot garage, and you want to add a dwelling unit.
Yep.
On top of that, I would read that as saying you can add 17 feet on top of the 12-foot garage, which would put you at 29 feet, I guess, if I understood, if I heard you correctly. Because I think you'd say the accessory dwelling unit can be, and I maybe in that case the whole thing would be considered, the whole building would be considered the dwelling unit. But I could see an argument that like, no. The first floor is the garage, which is separate from sort of the living space at the top, if you will. Maybe that's crazy.
No, these are the conversations that lead to changes to regulations where somebody finds a loophole and so how about this? Let me look at this language a little closer. I think I understand the intent of what you all are saying and the intent of what I'd like to do. And
I don't know if we know what the intent of what we're saying is.
I think I understand it.
That's a joke, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So let me go away and come back with some different language for item 4. Otherwise,
And maybe, Eric, maybe it's 2 footnotes. Maybe it's item 4 and 5.
Well, maybe
You
it
just
is, yeah.
Separate them out.
Oh, yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
maybe that's the way it goes too, is that it's a separate footnote to address both of these
An
scenarios.
accessory structure that is not an accessory dwelling may be this height. An accessory dwelling may be this height. 2 footnotes.
Right.
Something like
Yeah,
that.
it could be.
Yeah.
It could be 2 separate footnotes.
Yeah.
Otherwise, though, are folks comfortable with the 75% limitation on primary structures?
I'm okay with it.
Yes.
I would be okay with like 80%. But I understand the intent, and I think 75%, especially with the alternative minimum of 17 feet for a dwelling,
Right.
allows for something meaningful.
Yep.
So it's okay with me.
Okay.
I agree with that. I'm fine knowing like the rest of the commission is like tendencies. Like not to be too cute, but I made the joke to Brandon, I'd be fine with 99%.
Right.
But I also know that that's pushing it. So
Sure.
I'm fine with 75%. I'm fine with 80%, whatever.
We have to start somewhere.
I know.
So we may end up there, but
Okay.
okay, great. Then I will
Sounds
work
good.
on the footnotes here for this section. All right. The rest of Article 2, there's only a couple of other changes, and it's really more just cleanup. So I'm not going to go into those unless you all want to. Like I said, well, I will show you what they are without getting into the detail. Actually, let me zoom out here because that's awfully far in. But it's little things like hyphenating high density,
Oh,
high density mixed use hyphenated,
Yep.
and then a couple of table references that are wrong in 2 of these sections, updating them.
fine with me.
Otherwise, there's no other changes to Article 2.
Perfect.
Okay,
Great.
great. Article 2 in the books.
We ran through that one in about 45 minutes, so that's good.
Right, so Article 3, this is our downtown core. These are specific regulations for our downtown core district. Most of the changes that are being proposed here are either going to be cleanup or related to parking, since this does get impacted by Act 47. So the first thing I'm changing or proposing is under item 9 here for allowed uses. And actually, this is a comment that Sarah made. Changing hotels, motels, inns to basically just say lodging establishments or bed and breakfast. We don't have definitions for hotels, motels, or inns, but we do have definition for a lodging establishment and a bed and breakfast. So I'm looking at just changing it to add, or basically to say lodging establishment instead of those other things.
Sure.
And that you'll see that change highlighted throughout this article and Article 4. The next change is, this is cleanup, really more clarification related to how we measure the height of buildings. And in the downtown core, we measure based off of the high point of the immediate fronting street, but it doesn't take into account lots that are on a corner that might have 2 fronting streets. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to clarify what street would be used for measuring the height, which is what this change is for.
Yeah, that made sense to me when I read it.
So yeah, nothing, again, keeping all the general idea the same. The next change is in the parking section. So the first part here related to minimum parking, we had all these residential categories, basically deleting them and doing 1 space per dwelling unit, which is what Act 47 is requiring us to do. Let me zoom in here so it's a little bit easier to see. So adding that 1 space per dwelling unit for residential, eliminating these other components, and then changing lodging establishment from hotel to lodging establishment, and then adding sleeping room. That's what we call it in the parking section as well, so just for consistency. The other thing I'm proposing here is that we don't have any minimum, we'll delete and eliminate all the other minimums for the other uses and only have minimum parking for our residential uses.
I agree with that.
I think given the nature of downtown, given the fact that we've got an 850 space garage and another 300 space garage under construction, most of these other uses are going to be transient enough in nature that they lend themselves, and downtowns in general lend themselves to people coming and going and not needing dedicated parking on site. We also have a provision as it is that allows for the parking to be included in the garage for any use in downtown as long as there's an agreement in place with the city. So it kind of builds off of that idea and just says, whatever, if you've got a non-residential use in downtown, you don't need to provide parking for it.
This is just in downtown.
This is only in the downtown core. Yes, that's correct.
What do we have in the central business district?
It would the parking standards are based off of what we just recently adopted.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
those uses would be, none of that would be changing. So
The downtown core, Eric, is East Allen, Main Street.
it's the area in red is only
Yeah.
downtown core.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, East Allen, Main Street, and then basically it's to CCV,
Yep,
or, yeah, CCV.
yep. What I'm proposing here will only apply to this area in red.
Right.
Yep.
And
Oh,
along
and
with that,
it includes the Rotary Park.
correct, that's right.
All right.
Parking required for the park.
Yeah, and you still, because I was just thinking through, well, okay, that would mean if another apartment building was built in the downtown core, there'd be no parking minimum, but that's not right. It's one.
That's
it's
correct.
one-
That would still
yeah.
need parking. So
Yeah,
residential
yeah.
uses and hotels still require parking,
Yeah.
but anything else would
Yeah.
not need any parking.
Yeah, so like, fortunately it's gone, but like commodities
Yep.
would not need minimum parking. for
Exactly, that's
example.
right. Because there's a garage, there's off-street parking right there in front of the building. So, I mean, that's really what the downtown is
Yeah.
intended for, is for people and businesses and commerce and bikes and buses, not for parking.
Yep.
So the fact that we've got a city garage and another one on the way should accommodate any of the uses, any of the non-residential uses that would ever happen in downtown. So then that eliminates the need for a shared use table as well. This is just clarifying that this is for vehicle parking. So this basically says that all vehicle parking needs to be located in downtown, either in a municipal garage or on the site itself. Then the rest of this can also get deleted. Change of use won't matter anymore either. But then I'm adding in bicycle parking as well. We didn't have any standards for bicycle parking, so I'm including this. One of the provisions that we did include, just so to remind folks, is that we do allow for existing bicycle parking to be used to satisfy this and for the short term, and we allow short-term parking to be located in the right-of-way, so with Public Works approval. So this will allow the city to better identify where we want to put more large-scale bicycle parking that can serve the entire downtown core, and those areas would satisfy any of the short-term needs, provided there's enough spaces available based on the parking table. So just bringing forward the bike parking standards. Also bringing forward the long-term, short-term bike parking standards. I did eliminate a couple of the uses out of here, but in general, these are all still the same as what we just adopted in the Article 4 parking minimums.
That was
So,
in like the fall, summer, fall. It's hard to even remember the time.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, council just approved those
What was I say?
just at the end of last year.
Right.
Back in November, they
Yeah.
were approved by council. So I obviously took out things like, I think we had funeral homes listed here and industrial uses. Those were both taken out, so nothing there. But otherwise, they're all the same as what they were previously.
Eric, Mike just said he's excusing himself.
Yep.
Can we keep going? Because that
I
leaves
don't
us
think-
with two people, right? So.
Well, I don't think we can for the moment, since we don't have a quorum technically without Mike. So we'll
we wanna-
pause for now.
Yeah, you want to hit pause for a few minutes?
Yep, let me, bicycle parking. Again, I was saying this is all basically the same as what's included with our standard parking requirements. So no new language proposed in any of this for short-term or long-term. The one change that I did make, and I'll talk about this as well under Article 4, is item 8. The language that is included currently says required long-term bicycle parking shall be made available to all residents or tenants of the building free of charge. This is a comment that Sarah made where she was getting tripped up on the all because she was thinking that it's possible that there isn't enough parking for all, since we only require one space per unit. So if there's 2 people in the unit or 2 people in every unit, that would be double what would even be provided. So there wouldn't be an opportunity to provide it to all the residents or tenants. So basically changing that to the residents instead of all.
Can you share the screen where I can't see?
Oh, I'm sorry. I did stop sharing. Oh my goodness. Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
Leave it to me to mess everything up by leaving for a few minutes.
Wow. I forgot that I stopped my share.
Where are we?
Anyway, so
Oh.
Yeah, I'm here.
So yeah, just here on item 8, where it says the here previously, or in Article 4 says all,
Right.
but otherwise nothing's changing there. So, and then just deleting this section on non-complying structures because it's related to needing to add parking. So if it becomes conforming, If it's a residential structure, they would need to add parking, otherwise parking would not be needed. The only other change here is, again, for clarification, is some items on what's required with the zoning permit application. And really just to clarify the Act 250 piece that's needed. It was just written a little awkwardly, and I just wanted to make sure it made a little bit more sense with what's proposed there now. So, any questions or concerns on that information?
Nope.
The bulk of it really for Act 47. So I think eliminating that parking is a good thing. It gets us, one step closer to what is actually happening, I think, and makes sense. Also downtown.
And I'm going along with that, believe it or not.
I know. There's hope for you yet, Mike.
Well, we'll see.
Right.
And Eric, if I understood what you're saying, that the city is envisioning in the downtown core, there'd be like very large bike parking, like racks or something, right? Like,
we would have the opportunity to do that, and I believe
Yeah.
there was some corrals in front of the Champlain Mill for a while, and I think there is still quite a bit of bike parking there, or the racks are there. Maybe we took them out for the winter, but we usually do have a number of bike racks in front of the mill, and it'll allow us. I think there is an intent to incorporate more specific bicycle parking in and around downtown where we can, and where we have the space to do it. So, yes, those short-term spaces could be accommodated by any existing bike parking that's out there. And I should also say that any of the uses that are there now wouldn't need to adhere to any of these requirements because they're already existing.
Right.
It'll only be for new uses. Okay, so moving into Article 4, I know we just made changes and approved these, but we did talk about the fact that we would need to come back to them. So here we are. So the first change is actually unrelated to parking, but is something that I have been thinking about lately, and this is related to conversion or change of uses. So as it's written now, if you're changing a use from a permitted use to a permitted use, you still need a zoning permit. If you're going from permitted to conditional, you need a zoning permit. If you're going from conditional to permitted, you still need a permit. What I'm proposing here under item 1 is to basically say that if you're converting from a use that is permitted to another use that is permitted, and you're not adding any new square footage or any new lot coverage or any new residential units, you don't need a zoning permit at all. And it needs to be, and you don't need site plan approval. But the use itself has to be listed as only permitted in the use table and not permitted / conditional.
Yeah.
And where this has come up actually several times in recent months. Really what I'm trying to get at with this amendment is a lot of the non-residential spaces that we have. For example, in downtown, the building at the corner of West Center Street and Main Street, the Optum building, as I like to call it, right there on the corner. There's ground floor office space that they're looking to put a retail use in there and had to get a change of use permit for that. What this would do is allow them to change that use without needing to get a permit, because that's a permitted use now, and they're proposing a permitted use. They're not adding new square footage. They're not adding residential units. It's really a way to say, okay, you've got a storefront. As long as the use that you're proposing is permitted, you can change it out and you don't need a zoning permit. You might still need a building permit to do any fit-ups, but from a zoning standpoint, the uses that you're proposing and the uses that are there are all permitted uses, so there's no reason for you to come in to get a change of use permit. Because we're not going to do anything. All I'm doing is taking money from them and making them wait 15 days to do anything with their use. There's literally no review of the project from a zoning standpoint. If it's a permitted use going to a permitted use, and it's not adding square footage, it's not adding lot coverage, it's not adding dwellings, there is no zoning required.
Eric, in a case like that, is there any kind of building code requirements or checks, either state fire marshal or
So if they're doing any fit up or any change to the interior, yes, they would need to get a building permit. They would need to get a state building permit as well with fire marshal review. So there would be some level of application required for that.
Okay. It's
So-
just a zoning permit.
Correct, just to avoid the zoning piece of it altogether. And like I said, this is pretty narrowly focused to uses that are only permitted, that are not adding new square footage, that are not adding lot coverage, and that are not adding residential uses.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so the next,
And let me just, and that eliminates the 15-day waiting period too?
correct, yep,
Okay.
yep.
So it's a user-friendly amendment.
Absolutely, yeah. It's really in design, and at least the way I thought about this was, it's really intended to allow for, if a business moves out of a storefront, for a new business to move in right away and not have any type of waiting period to do that. Or, for example, Standing Stone Wines on the east side of the circle, they have a long-term plan. They started out as retail, but they have a plan to start kind of selling food out of that to kind of go to more of a, like a restaurant type use. This would allow them just to do it without needing to come in to get a permit from me to say, yeah, you can put a restaurant in there. It's a permitted use. It should be able to just add on to the existing use.
I'm fine with that.
I'm good with it too.
Okay, great. That's what I was hoping for. All right, the next part here is specific to parking. I wanted to be clear, so I wanted to clarify here actually we have this provision that if you're exceeding the minimum parking by 125%, that you need to get approval by the DRB as a conditional use. I wanted to clarify that that's surface parking. So if you're doing a parking garage, for example, or underground parking, if you're doing underground parking, a parking garage would still be surface parking, in my opinion. If you're doing underground parking, you're not creating any new surface area, any new impervious cover. So if you wanted to exceed 125% of underground parking, that's fine. This would just be for surface parking.
So it's almost like a soft parking maximum
Kind of,
in
yeah.
some sense.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, to basically say, we don't want you creating a massive surface lot on your property. And if you want to, you have to get approval from the Development Review Board to do it.
This is, I'm sorry, is this just in the downtown core? Or is
This would be for
everywhere?
anything except the residential districts.
Okay.
Because right now they only have a requirement, or they will have a requirement of one space. So if they put in two, they've well exceeded that. They're 200% over. So
right, yeah.
So
they
it's-
don't, yeah.
yeah, so I wanted to give some. I didn't want any of those uses coming through the DRB. The next changes are really related to Act 47. So taking all of our residential uses and combining them into one, and basically saying just one space per dwelling unit, which is what the state is mandating. And then clarifying accessory dwelling unit is just one space per dwelling unit, just adding in that terminology for consistency with our definitions. Again, here just changing it from hotel to lodging establishment per Sarah's comment and what we just talked about under Article 3. And then there's a couple of other little changes that I'm proposing. That is just a footnote correction, so there's nothing there.
Eric, if you can go back, sorry.
No.
We talked about the school, the instructional space is equivalent to a classroom.
So we added a definition for instructional space as well.
Right. I remember we had this long discussion and,
Yeah, it's basically a classroom.
Yeah.
Specifically, well, it's a space included in a building intended for teaching or academic use, including traditional classrooms, art rooms, music rooms, computer rooms, or seminar rooms.
yeah, okay.
I thought we added gyms to that.
We did not.
Okay, that's
we
better.
did-
That's better.
If we
I'm
did, we
fine
took
with
it
that.
out. Okay.
Like 200 per gym or something like that, or
Right.
Yeah, I think
one per seat in the gym?
So this is so item B here, as it's written, we're requiring the short-term parking for bicycles outdoor it needs to be outdoor and covered. I'm proposing we strike the outdoor covered because it contradicts language in another section where we do allow for short-term parking to be uncovered if it's a certain distance away. If it's a certain distance to the building. So we don't require that it be covered in one section, but here we are requiring it to be covered. So I wanted to clarify, so I'm fine changing it in one or the other, but I think one of them needs to be amended. And I think this one makes more sense because in the other section, actually let me just go to that so we can look at it. The other section has a caveat for distance. Yeah, here under short term. So if it's on site within 50 feet, it can be anywhere, but if it's on site further than 50 feet, it needs to be covered. So if it's further than 50 feet, we're saying it needs to be covered. But in this other section under the incentives for TDMs, we're saying that it needs to be covered. Mm-hmm. So I think there's an argument can be made that the TDM piece is specific to the relief that's being given, so it needs to be covered, where here it doesn't need to be. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if we want to have the two standards because it does need a bit of an explanation or might need additional clarification for that purpose.
I'm fine with the proposed change to make it more consistent. The only thing in the back of my mind is Abby's not in this meeting.
Well, right, yeah.
And I defer to her around this kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But I'm also fine with this language, so I don't know. Should we hit pause on this and then?
Yeah, we can. I just wanted to bring this up as something that, we'll review all this again.
Yeah.
At a future.
So Connor, you're fine with the way it's presented in both places, or changing to be consistent?
Yeah, I'm fine with changing to be consistent in this proposed change from Eric tonight. But I also like to have Abby's input.
Yeah, I agree with that. See, I'm good with the way it's written now, so.
The reason
that's me.
I think the reason why it is, So the reference, there is the reference to 412G under the TDM piece, which is what we were just looking at.
Yeah.
So it's because of the reference in there, because there's the reference, it's not specific to just the TDM strategy. So that's why I just want to have the discussion to see which way we go. I'm fine either way as well. I just want to make sure we're consistent.
Well, let's defer and get the expert in here.
This did just come up
Abby.
recently when I was talking with an applicant about a project. They were like, "Well, it says covered here, but it says not covered there. So what am I going by?" And I didn't have a good answer. So it didn't become an issue, but anyway.
I thought, though, the difference was we were talking before about the downtown core, where it doesn't have to be covered.
This is for anywhere. This is for any bike parking.
Right. So maybe we just put in excluding the downtown core.
Well,
because they have their own, it has its own.
Well, so this section doesn't apply to downtown anyway. There's already the caveat at the beginning of section 412 that exempts downtown from it.
Okay, well, yeah, so for that reason, I don't see a conflict, because what we talked about earlier was just the downtown core, where it doesn't have to be covered.
Well, so this is for everywhere else in the city.
That's what I'm saying. Everywhere else, it has to be covered, but so far from the main building.
Oh, so
The down,
well, so
right?
These are both in the same section. There's two references to covered bike parking in the same section, which applies to everything except the downtown core.
Right, and the downtown core doesn't need covered parking.
Right, so this is downtown, set that aside.
Right, so that's what I'm saying. I have no problem because the downtown is separate. This is every place else.
Oh,
So I don't see the conflict.
You're saying consistency between this and the downtown core. Or
I'm saying it's consistent because the downtown core has its own set of rules, separate from these. You follow me?
right, but within this section, there's a conflict, is what I'm saying.
Because it says 412G?
Well, because it says covered, in this section under Part B, it's specifically saying that at a minimum, there needs to be short-term outdoor covered bicycle parking, consistent with the standards
Oh, yeah.
in 12G.
Yeah.
But in 12G, we say that bike parking can be covered or not covered.
Gotcha.
So that's where the conflict is.
So can we just eliminate section 412G?
Oh, no.
No.
No,
No?
we need to keep that. I think it's we can either eliminate the outdoor covered here, or
Yeah.
we need to clarify it that it's potentially specific to the TDM strategy that this section is in, or have some other referential component to it so that there's clarity in what we're talking about. Like I said,
Oh, I
I don't
gotcha.
care which way we go with it. I just want to make sure that it's consistent.
Gotcha.
So anyway, we can set that aside. Agreed that
Yep.
that's something we can set aside.
Okay.
The other change is, let's see, what else do I have here? I think the only other change here is related to, so lodging establishment, again, instead of hotel, under minimum bike parking, and then the same comment that we looked at under the downtown core, that changing the all residents to the residents based on comments from Sarah. And then the last thing that I'm proposing in this section is under dimensions. Some of this is stemming from draft legislation that I don't believe is included anymore, but was included for a minute. And also the fact that we don't have any standards or allowances for compact car parking. So I wanted to add in a provision for that, and also basically take out all the numbers that we're including on minimum parking and just say, follow the Department of Public Works standards for parking dimensions and drive aisles, which is, we either have it or it's drafted. So it's basically follows all of these numbers, but it allows, what this would do is allow those to change without having to change the regulations, the zoning regulations, the land use regulations. So this is consistent with some other things we've done, like ADA parking, where we basically said, just follow the ADA rules for what your minimum parking standards are. This would basically be a similar thing that says, follow our public works standards for drive aisles and parking space sizes, depending on the angles and everything else. And then you're allowed to do up to 20% of the minimum required parking as compact. So Sarah actually asked if that was too much, the 20%. It may be too little. For example, Burlington allows up to 50% of their minimum parking to be compact spaces. So I thought this was a good start for where we are. We're not quite yet to a density threshold, I don't think, to where we can just have everybody driving small cars. People still drive big vehicles out there, myself included. So, not everything can fit in a compact space. So we want to make sure that it's not just all a bunch of little spaces in a parking lot.
Yep.
So,
I thought 20% was a good place to start.
because I think that the compact car thing, I think is maybe, this is me. I think that can work really well for people living in apartments without families downtown. I think it's harder if you're sort of more out in like the residential areas.
Agreed.
So
Agreed. And that's the last thing I had on this section.
Good.
Okay, so
So we'll hang on to talk more about the bicycle parking when Abby's here.
so
Yeah, her
the
input.
only two notes that I have is the bike parking, actually the covered bike parking piece. And then the note on accessory dwellings in the dimensional table.
Yeah, maybe making two footnotes.
Right, something else there.
Okay.
Going back to that, I did my math again, and under the 75%, if you had a 35-foot primary structure, the secondary dwelling unit could be 25.75 feet. I had said 24.5, but that would be 70. 24.5 would be 70%.
Thank you. I was going to call you out on that, but I didn't want to
I was
put you on the spot.
I was too.
All right, well, that gets us through all of those pieces. So
Nice.
thank you very much for that. And yeah,
Good.
we'll look at that again, and we'll bring some of this discussion back at our next meeting and start looking at Article 5, which is going to get into the priority housing incentives. So we'll have a lot of discussion there. There's also a bunch of other changes I'm proposing in Article 5, mostly as cleanup and just clarification. So there will be a lot to go through, but the bulk of what is really going to be impactful will be that the priority housing stuff. So we'll get in that next meeting.
So is that kind of a precursor to the joint meeting with the Housing Commission?
I mean, it's not intended to be, but I think it's going to line up pretty good for timing.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that wasn't the intent, but I think that is going to be a happy outcome.
Good. All right. City updates. Mayor Lott, you have anything to update us on? Budget.
We're done with that. You guys get to vote on it now.
That's right.
Just kidding, not done. I still have one more presentation to do.
I won't be there to
so-
give you crap, so you'll be good.
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
Couple of updates from Tuesday's city council meeting. So we reviewed draft agreements with Champlain Housing Trust for the O'Brien Community Center. At the last meeting, well, the last one I attended, there was concern on this commission for the updating the zoning, ensuring that the use of that CHT doesn't change the use of the building. And so I will include, if I can paste into the chat. Oh, you're not on Zoom. Okay, basically we authorized a resolution for the city manager to sign the documents. And this includes a statement that CHT intends to retain the facility as a community center and will honor the terms of existing leases with O'Brien Center tenants. And then the options agreement, so one of the pieces of the development agreement, mentions the zoning change and includes a sentence that the optionee intends to use the property as a community center. So this is language to address that while we transfer ownership, they will be retaining it as a community center and not changing the use. There is also in the leases for both the city and the community health centers, options to purchase the space at the end of the lease. Not necessarily something the city's going to do, but I know the community health center wants to. But that's yet another way to sort of ensure the long-term consistency of use of the space. Two other updates. We adopted the white. Yeah.
Let me interrupt you. I'm sorry. Because one of the things was that the lots would be merged to create one lot. Was that put in the agreement, or is that something the city plans to do before it sells?
It's in the agreement that we will, Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, if you're involved in this at all. It is in the agreement that we intend to make we intend to make the zoning change. But part of our intent to make the zoning change is their intent to retain the use of the community center. Right,
but specifically that the 21 Hickok Street will be merged into and become part of the larger parcel.
Yeah, that language is in there.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, and I've also, just to say a few more words on that, I've had some conversations with other city staff about trying to get that process moving sooner than later, because it is an administrative process to dissolve that boundary line, so that ideally that could be done before the zoning amendments go to council for approval, and that way it can all just happen at once.
Perfect.
Okay. The two other items, we adopted the walk bike plan, which is somewhat relevant to this work, right? Provides us,
That means I have to walk and bike everywhere?
you specifically, Mike.
Okay. Probably
No,
good for me.
it just provides recommendations that we can look to in the future as there are funding opportunities to make improvements in our network. And we adopted the short-term rental regulations. So we now will require licensing from anyone operating a short-term rental in the city of Winooski, with a $250 fee for owner-occupied folks and $1,400 for non-owner occupied annually. That money will be used to cover some of the costs of administration and inspection, but also put some ongoing funding into our housing trust fund to support more affordable housing options.
So
So
that will
staff will
become
now
effective,
start.
I'm sorry, that'll become effective 30 days from when you approved it?
Is it the same? Does it work the same for?
I don't know, I'm assuming, but,
That was part of
I
the
mean, there
I
must be
think
an
so.
appeal period.
part of the
right?
municipal code, so yes, that would be a 30-day effective.
Yeah, and then staff has got to start doing outreach. Oh, and it's written so that like a year from now, when we have people licensed, there's data, we can then set a cap on how many non-owner occupied units there are in the city. The current council's intent for that is that we would cap it to what's existing and not allow additional non-owner occupied short-term rentals.
So I guess I missed the boat.
Not yet.
You can rent out room in your house, Mike. That's
True.
still allowed.
You got time.
I got time.
That's it for
Not gonna
my
happen.
city updates.
Thanks, Christine. Eric?
I have no specific updates for y'all tonight.
Okay. Let's move on to other business. Anyone on the commission have other business?
I don't.
Then I'll throw it to you, Eric, for our usual other business next meeting.
Yep, the only other business I have is our next meeting will be March 14th, so we have a little bit of a gap here, just given the way the calendar lines up. So, but yeah, March 14th will be our next regular meeting. We will have a public hearing on the amendments to the O'Brien Community Center at that meeting as well. And then following, we will have a joint meeting on March 19th. That's a Tuesday. That will be a joint meeting with the Housing Commission. So I believe that is it'll be a hybrid. Those will both be hybrid meetings. So more information coming out on both of those.
Perfect. Okay, if there's no other business, I'd look for a motion to adjourn
I'll
at
move.
8:05.
I'll second.
Okay, I'm assuming we're all in favor. Technically, we should raise our hand or say yes.
Well, and you have to vote on this one, Mike, so.
I did. I raised my hand. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all very much.
Okay.